Welcome to this brand new podcast series, Life as a Neurodivergent Student, a collaboration with Student Minds and all things mental health. As part of Student Minds, Student Space Resources, this series explores neurodivergent experiences of mental health well-being in higher education. This is episode 5. Today we're going to be talking about finding balance as a neurodivergent student. Subjects include work-life balance and burnout, late diagnosis, academic identity, medical gaslighting and personal insight, and specific information that can help you with your own identity and rest. My name is Andrew Shattuck. I have ADHD. I'm a third-year exercise and sports student at Hartford University, and I'm also an international student.
I'm Sarah Clark. I'm a late diagnosed autistic adult and a lived experience researcher. I have an MSc in clinical and developmental neuropsychology, and I'm currently undertaking a part-time Masters by Research degree exploring how to reduce diagnostic delays for autistic people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I also have several other roles, and I sit as a patient expert in the Psychiatric and Psychological Aspects Working Group on the EDS International Consortium, and I'm an expert by experience autism trainer on the Oliver McGowan mandatory training programme for health and social care staff.
That's amazing. I just want to pick up on some of the research you've been doing, because obviously you authored a patient perspective article in Journal of Patient Experience in April 2025. So you live experience, you have autism yourself, but you also publish research. So my question for you is, how do you deal with work-life balance? How do you manage burnout as an autistic student and researcher? And how does that make you feel?
That's an excellent question, Andrew, and quite tricky. It's actually been a really steep learning curve for me. So as I've already mentioned, I work in a paid role as an autism trainer. My research is to do with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and autism. I volunteer with the Ehlers-Danlos Society, and it's something that I'm very interested in myself through my own health and wellness journey. So work-life balance is actually quite tricky, and it's a constant negotiation for me. Doesn't mean striving for perfect equilibrium, but instead it's learning how to tune into my body and adapt and be flexible in my working day. So as an autistic person with complex physical health needs as well and physical disabilities, I have to be flexible in my work and listen to my body. I might plan my schedule for that day, but then I might have a pain or a fatigue flare up and then need to adapt my approach to working and take some rest that day. And then I might be able to catch up and work the next day. But exhaustion and physical fatigue and pain has taught me that sustainability matters more than intensity. I've had to adapt my way of thinking and stop comparing myself to other people and how productive they can be in their working day and just work in the way that's sustainable for me. So I've learnt that rest isn't something that you earn. Rest is something that I need to build into my working day to function properly. So over time, I've started using assistive technology software to support my executive functioning, built in some rest breaks during my day. So I can't work a full day. I tend to work half days and then take a break at lunchtime, go and do something in the afternoon, maybe go for a walk, go to a yoga class, and then maybe do some more work late afternoon or in the evening. But that's the only way that I can pace myself and make my work sustainable. Also like to seek out connection with like-minded people and other autistic people where I feel safe to be myself and be authentic, and where I don't feel like I need to mask and to pretend to fit in.
You speak about not comparing yourself to others. You also say that it's a journey to try to find yourself within work. And I feel like for a lot of people, especially people who have a condition and then also have to study and work and find themselves within their niche, what type of recommendations would you give other people who have similar conditions to you? If you could give one recommendation to your younger self to try to find yourself and not compare yourself to others, what would that be?
That's an excellent question too. So I was late diagnosed autistic 3 years ago. So in my taught masters in clinical and developmental neuropsychology, I was sat in the autism lectures on my course, and it started really resonating with me. And that was the first point in my life where I started wondering if I could be autistic. I knew nothing about female presentation autism, and I had quite a stereotypical view of little boys liking trains portrayed through the media. So that was a real turning point in my life where I got diagnosed. And previously, I'd been misdiagnosed with emotionally unstable personality disorder, which is common occurrence in females that are late diagnosed autistic. So I had been very stigmatized and pathologized because of the personality disorder misdiagnosis. And I often felt like a failure and blamed myself and compared myself to other people. And I felt that I couldn't function and be as productive as other people. But reframing the narrative I have on myself since my autism diagnosis, I've learned to be a lot more compassionate and kinder to myself. And there's definitely things that I know I struggle more with, and now I know that I'm autistic, it makes sense, some of my communication and sensory differences. So I've learnt strategies and ways around that, and definitely built in periods of time before and after something stressful so that I can regulate myself through the day. So I think it's brought a greater awareness about strategies I can learn to manage the conditions I have.
I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned, having ADHD, and that's something we share in common. Growing up, it was a bit difficult for me. You said you were late diagnosed. I was diagnosed in my third year of university. So throughout my whole childhood, I always thought I was a bit different. I compared myself to other people, and I wasn't able to achieve the same goals that they were able to do. I was different. I always compared myself to the physical attributes, their mental attributes, the way they could read faster than me. And I was always bullied for the fact I couldn't read or spell correctly. Now that has shaped the way I am now, and that has shaped the person I have become. And I think finding these strategies is probably the best thing you can do if you don't have a diagnosis or you're trying to find who you are as a person. Because each person is brought onto this earth differently. And once you find yourself and the way you strategize the best work for you is when you can start being productive.
So for you, what does burnout look like and feel for you, and how do you notice it creeping in?
The reality is not very well, if I'm completely honest. Having ADHD, I'm constantly in a situation of fight or flight. And throughout my early years of university, so when I was 18 to around 21, it was a difficult journey of falling over and getting back up. But it wasn't any progression. I fell over, I got back up, but I was in the same place I was previously, and sometimes I got back up worse. So the way I think about burnout is that it's going to be inevitable. If you're comparing yourself to other people, although you have strategies, you'll never be enough, at least in your mind mentally. And for me, I was never enough. The way I combated that was going and getting help. So once I started to realize that I did have some problems, or not necessarily problems, I had different ways of thinking, I went out to people, I talked to them. And I realized that, and this may be a slightly unconventional way of thinking about ADHD or neurodivergency, but I spoke to people that had similar conditions to me, and they talked a lot about addiction. And this may be controversial, but let me get into it before we have any talks about it. Addiction, the way you recover is that you understand that relapse is inevitable. But you build up and you fall down, but you try to build up more than what you did previously. So if you think about it as like an upward mountain, you may have a dip, but then you get back up and you continue walking up straight. And that's the way I thought about my ADHD after I got my diagnosis. Although it was late, I started to walk up that mountain. And I fell, I got into ruts, I wasn't able to clean my room for a couple of weeks, but then I got up and I realized, no, that's not me anymore. And I continued to go up. I feel like these coping strategies, as you previously stated, the realization that you need to find different ways of working, helped me climb up that mountain to where I am now. And I still fall over, but I think right now I'm on the top. And if you were to ask me, how do I deal with burnout? It's realizing that it's inevitable, understanding that it's going to happen, realizing that once you're down, you need to find yourself back up, and trying to get back on the tip of that iceberg of that mountain. Because if you continue to go down that same path and not recovering better than you did previously, you're not going to go anywhere. And that leads me on to my next question, because you talked about self-identity, but that's also academic identity. You were diagnosed later in life, and how has that shaped your academic journey? You talked about having medical gaslighting in some of your papers. I've seen your LinkedIn account, but what changed before and after you got the diagnosis? What was that mental thought process throughout the journey? And do you feel like you are better now for it? And if you are better now for it, what coping strategies or what mechanisms have you developed to try to improve yourself?
Before my autism diagnosis, I had a diagnosis of emotionally unstable personality disorder, which was actually a misdiagnosis. And I was very pathologized and stigmatized. I was turned away from a lot of support services because no one really wants to get involved with anyone with an EUPD diagnosis. I felt very negatively. I felt a failure. I felt like I couldn't cope, and I felt defective, felt like I had problems regulating my emotions. I was made to feel at fault for that. But since getting diagnosed autistic and learning about autism through my research degree as well as my own interests, I've realised that many autistic people struggle with the same things that I do. So I think spending time with other autistic people and discussing things that we find difficult, discussing things that we're interested in, has really helped me. Spending time with other people who struggle with the same things as me and talking about strategies they use to in their working life and time outside work or education. Also had some reasonable adjustments at university. So in my taught master's degree, I was allowed some extensions if I wasn't well enough to complete my work in time, and that made a big difference. And assistive technology software and just things like that, just to help me cope a little bit better and not get so tired.
Now, you said you were turned away from support, you were misdiagnosed, people labeled you as something you weren't. And I found that a common occurrence in my life. And I asked you what changed previously to after your diagnosis. And I think what I'm about to say may sum what happened to you up the same ways it summoned to me up. So what I previously thought was, you are what people said about you. So I was the information, I was the person that people labels me as. So I didn't have ADHD, I was just a crazy kid. But in reality, the thought process that I have developed now is that you are who you think you are. You are the person that you want to be. And no matter what people say around yourself, whatever somebody labels you as, or you're not good enough, or you can't write, you can't spell, you can't do something because you have that condition, it's a fallacy. You can do whatever you want as long as you believe in it. And if anybody who's listening to this thinks that they're not good enough, or anybody thinks that they're labeled something and they believe that they're not able to do something, or they're working hard but they can't get there because somebody says they can't, you can. And I promise you from the bottom of my heart that you can. And it took me 19 years to find that out. And it may have taken you longer, but you can.
That's great advice, Andrew. I actually went to London Autism and ADHD show the other day, and one of the talks there, someone said that she had considered herself a massive failure in life up until the point of diagnosis, but when she got diagnosed, she actually reframed the narrative she had on everything, and she started thinking that the advice she'd been given up until that point was actually bad advice, and it wasn't her that was the failure, it was the outside world and other people's expectations of her. So I think something that I've really found through my research degree I'm doing at the moment, looking at diagnostic delays, is that people go through a process which is almost like grief after getting a diagnosis, and you have a period of time adjusting to the diagnosis and looking back on your life and thinking what could have been different if you had known about your diagnosis earlier in your life. So for many people, there's a period of reflection and negativity before finding strategies and different ways of coping and adjusting to your diagnosis and a new way of being with this new awareness you gain with a diagnosis.
You previously stated that once you get your diagnosis, there's a period of reflection and negativity. You think you're different, you think that you're not going to be able to do something because of your new diagnosis. But in reality, you're the same person you were beforehand. And the only thing that just happened with a diagnosis is that you've changed and you realize that you are something. And that's not a negative thing. In fact, it's a positive thing. And I want to touch up on the positive effects of first ADHD, and then I'll ask you about your autism experience in the workplace, because we're talking about work-life balance here. So for me, ADHD has given me an ability that I didn't realize until recently, that I can hyperfixate on things that I really like. Now that used to be translated as I would get really good at something and then I'll give it up 3 months later. Like I got the chess, I beat one of my friends who was 2,100 ELO, which is in the chess world pretty okay, but then I gave up afterwards. But then when you realize it and you start doing things you like for me, it was video creation. For you, it could be something different. It could be blogs, it could be research. You can hyperfixate a lot more than other people can. I can dedicate hours on end to doing the thing I love. And that's something that's not talked too much about. I feel like a lot of people stigmatize ADHD as something that's negative. And it may be the same for autism. But in reality, we have superpowers that we need to tap into. And it's the same for work and life. You can work harder, but in life you can have some advantages too. So I was wondering, with autism, is there some untold or unforeseen benefits that people don't talk about that you'd like to discuss with the audience here?
That's an excellent question too. So I also think that being autistic is quite pathologized, and even within diagnostic manuals, they focus on deficits and things that you can't do. But actually, being neurodivergent, being autistic, having ADHD can bring about many strengths. And I'm multiply neurodivergent, so autistic, dyscalculia, probably dyslexic, never been assessed, possibly have ADHD as well. I think my neurodivergence does bring strengths to my research. So, like you, I do have an ability to focus, and I have many things that I'm really passionate about, and I can definitely spend hours focusing on things that I'm really interested in. But then there are areas of my life where I do really struggle, things like making phone calls, and people see that I'm doing another degree at university, they think that I'm functional and can cope okay, but what's termed a spiky profile, and there are definitely things that I do need more support than other people would, but then there are things that I'm better at than most people are. But I'm really glad that you've found, even if it's taken a bit longer in your life, that you've now found that you've got strengths.
It's just like anybody in life, even if you don't have any conditions. And I say the word conditions, I'm sorry if that offends anybody, that's the word I use. But it's just taking the good with the bad. Everybody's made different. Everybody's brought on this earth for a reason. And that is something that I recognized recently. So previously I had struggles with self-identity. I thought I wasn't good enough because I wasn't comparing to the norms of the people set by me. I had expectations that I didn't meet as a child, and even when I went into university, sometimes I failed, sometimes I excelled in different strategies, and that made people think that I was lazy because sometimes I was really good at something but really bad at others. So I just want to tackle on one point that I feel like is really hyper relevant to this situation. You need to realize that you are different to other people. You are not going to do the same thing that that person does, but you can do other things that are different. And here we're talking about work-life balance or finding balance as a neurodivergent student, but in reality, it should probably summarized as finding balance in life. And it's not necessarily extrapolated as a neurodivergent student, but everybody goes through these processes. So if I had to give recommendations just based off on your points and my points too, is recognize that you have differences than other people. Don't compare yourself to others, because that is just a fast-track way to feeling bad about yourself and failure, and then building on your strengths and having coping mechanisms to deal with them and deal with your weaknesses. So if you take anything out this talk, I'd really like you to have a thought about yourself. Take like 20 seconds after you read this talk, write down on a piece of paper everything you're good at, write down on a piece of paper everything you're bad at, and realize the differences that you have that are in the good and the bad, and then make coping mechanisms to try to improve them. Because it's not a negative thing to have bad things. It's a negative thing to have bad things and not do anything about them, and then think about yourself as somebody who can't do something. But then use your good things to your advantage too.
That's excellent advice. Thank you, Andrew. I will take that on board myself, actually. What has helped you feel less alone as a neurodivergent student? And did you have any friends at university who also had ADHD?
Great question. And the answer is people like you, Sarah. So people who are openly speaking about it, people who are getting rid of the stigma behind being neurodivergent. And the reality is, although there may have been a couple of friends or people who I found acquaintances that had ADHD, none of them had deep conversations with me. In fact, they stigmatized their own conditions and then blamed me for doing things that I wasn't able to do, because them themselves were not sure about who they were, what they were, and they, at least I think, betrayed that by making everything else around them negative as well, which I've done myself. And I feel like I'm not going to be the only person here talking about it, that I've done bad things because I thought bad about myself. What's actually kept me less alone is understanding the fact that I'm alone, is understanding the fact that I am different, and that I don't have to find myself within a friend group to make myself validated, that I could literally be home, do work whenever I want to, and I would feel really good. It's the realization that you yourself don't need to fit into a specific shape. If I'm a triangle, I don't need to fit in with rectangles. And I'm going to be completely honest here, I probably have 3 friends. 3 good friends. 3 good friends that have stayed with me throughout my whole life, that don't judge me, don't try to manipulate me to be anybody else. And I've lost probably 10 times that amount throughout my university journey. But I've never felt more loved. I've never felt more involved in a community. So if I had to answer your question and you asked me, what has made me feel less alone throughout this journey, it'd probably be realizing that being alone's okay. How's that made you feel?
I found a similar thing as well, actually. And I definitely used to compare myself to other people, but we're all unique human beings and we're all on a different journey and a different path. And I think something that's helped me since my diagnosis is just learning to accept myself and my differences and my strengths, and develop my identity as to who I am now. And I'm actually very proud of the journey I've been on, because previously I did have a lot of struggles and I've overcome a lot of barriers. Like you, I don't really have tons and tons of friends. I've got a few really good friends, but they say it's quality, not quantity, don't they? And the friends I've got have helped me through a lot of struggles in my life and been there for me. I also have to mention my cat Dusty, who's my best friend, and she provides me a lot of emotional support, and she's got this ability to realise when I'm having a really bad day, either when I'm feeling more anxious or when I'm in pain or feeling really tired, and she comes and gives me cuddles. So she's massive support in my life.
We both talked about the fact that sometimes we don't fit in, and that's okay. But the reality is some people who diagnose us may not think that either. So they may diagnose us for something that they didn't know. In your experience, how has medical gaslighting shifted your understanding of your own life, healthcare, and education?
For most people who have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, it takes on average for 10 to 12 years to get diagnosed by a doctor. Most people go through a very long, difficult, traumatic diagnostic journey. Very common for people to be invalidated by their doctors, to not be believed, and this has a huge psychological impact on their well-being. If you live through many years of going to medical appointments, being told that there's nothing wrong with you, that it's all in your head, so you start to doubt yourself, and it's not really good for your general self-esteem. I've based a lot of my patient advocacy work and a lot of my blogs around medical gaslighting and medical invalidation, because I think it's something really important to raise awareness of. Now, this isn't something that I'm specifically looking at through my research degree. I'm looking more specifically at diagnostic delays, and I hope to make some recommendations about what can be done to reduce the time it takes to get diagnosed. So just in case anyone has never heard of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, it's a common co-occurrence with neurodivergence, and it's thought that up to 50% of neurodivergent people may be hypermobile. So I have the hypermobile type of EDS. And in terms of medical gaslighting and how it ties into my research degree, I think I've been on quite a journey, being very invalidated and pathologised, but being properly diagnosed with EDS and autism and some co-occurring conditions has really helped me reframe my narrative and helped me realise things that I struggle more with and things that I'm very good at. So it's definitely a long journey, and it's been a process of self-discovery and learning to show myself compassion and kindness. What do rest and balance mean for you, Andrew, in the current season of your life?
You talked a lot about being flexible with your work schedule and understanding that you're going to be able to do some things and sometimes you're not going to be able to do stuff. And in your research, because I've read one of your papers, that up to 31 to 39% of people who have autism have joint hypermobility and supporting, and that supports your focus. But besides being flexible in your work life, I feel like being flexible in your own body and having that hypermobility also helped you because it gives you a physical outlet. I studied sports and exercise science, but even before then, I did push-ups in my room. I was doing squats, listening to hardcore rocky music, thinking I was a boxer when I was 15. Everybody gets that little jig on in the room when they're a kid. But the reality, I think it's a lot more deeper than that. Physical exertion, exercising, moving around has a compound effect on my mental health. How does it affect my mental health? Besides the numerous health benefits such as improved dopamine production, reducing a lot of the negative feelings and hormones that cause anxiety and stress, what it does is it gives you structure. And you talk about being flexible. And flexible is very important, but structure also is very important in my life. Having ADHD, I can do 1,000 things at once. But if I have a structure with my physical outlets, if I go to the gym at a certain point and then that structures me to then do work afterwards. So what I'm trying to get at here, in terms of how I deal with the rest and how I work with my flexible schedule, is having understanding that you have a schedule set up for the day. That can be as simple as getting up and writing 3 things on a piece of paper, and it can be as rigorous as you want. It can be structured study plan with your gym schedules involved. But when I talk about rest, it's important that you choose rest that suits you. Because, for example, I just went on holiday for 4 days to Bulgaria, and that's completely reset my schedule. So when I went back here, I've lost everything. So if I give any recommendation to people who have ADHD or have neurodivergencies that get off track easily, having a schedule is number one, probably very important. Being flexible with that schedule, understanding your needs, mental and psychologically, but also choosing rest that suits you. A 4-day holiday may be great, but when you get back, if it disrupts your schedule, it may not be the type of rest for you. It could be just a 40-minute break from work. So the way I combat a lot of my burnout, the way I combat a lot of my anxiety, stress, is that I have a schedule I can fall back onto. I understand that if I miss something, it's not the end of the world. And thirdly, I choose rest that suits me. And I can't give recommendations to anybody else because it's going to be completely different depending on what you have and where you are or where you grew up.
I take quite a somatic, embodied approach to my well-being. So I practice yoga and mindfulness, and these are things that I've only started in the past few years. And up until that point, I used to get very annoyed with people telling me to go and do yoga, but now it's a big part of my life. I definitely find that it's helped with my proprioception and interoception and helped bring awareness to my body. It helps me manage my pain and fatigue and just general feelings of well-being. So just as a finishing note to bring some positivity to end our conversation, I think the one thing that's brought me the most joy this week has been park yoga on Sunday morning and practicing yoga outside. I definitely find that time in nature has a really positive effect on my well-being. So what would you say is the one thing that's brought you the most rest this past week? You've just mentioned your holiday. Was there anything particular that you did on your holiday that was very restful?
If I'm completely honest, my holiday wasn't very restful. It was a stressful time because I was outside of my schedule, and I didn't realize that until my holiday. Nature is such a good one. You talked about nature and walking through the roads. That is such a positive aspect. I think if you can take 10 minutes out of your day to go for a walk, specifically in forested areas, it's been shown clinically to improve your mood by 10%. Sunlight also 15% improves your dopamine. There's different supplements you can take as well, but I won't go into that. If you get out and be active, that would probably be the best one. But in terms of the best rest I can find is talking to people, talking to my family, getting that mental reset from work, stopping 5 minutes, talking to somebody, completely changing your thought process so that when you go back to work or you go back to doing something, you have now resetted your mindset. So besides from walking, as you stated previously, going out to nature, seeing your cat, Dusty, but also understanding that just speaking with people is a powerful mechanism. And this podcast, even now sitting down speaking to you, has separated me from my work, and I will go back with a refreshed mindset.
I think that's really interesting actually, because recently had a conversation with someone about rest in neurodivergent people, and I know neurotypical people that find it really useful to binge watch a Netflix series in the evening, but I actually get very bored watching TV. So for me, rest might be doing some reading about things that I'm really interested in, and once I get into the flow state, that's the way I can regulate myself. So I think rest for neurodivergent people is different to rest for neurotypical people.
When people tell me to stop working on the weekends, I'm like, no, I like working. It's part of my schedule. Like when people tell Andrew, you need your well-earned rest. You've been working 12 hours today. You need a well-earned rest. Yeah, rest is super important. But if I don't do that work on the weekend, I'll be doing anything. I'll be soaking in my bed. So active rest for me is my thought process. And I don't think there's enough research on it. Rest doesn't have to be doing nothing, sit down on your chair. It can be reading a book. It can be doing work specifically slower than we were previously. And I don't think that's talked about enough. And that we don't have time in this podcast, but understanding your rest, as I stated previously, is probably one of the biggest things I've done in the last 6 months that helped me improve my productivity and my self-identity. And it sounds small, but in reality, as we've just talked about, it's super important, and there should be more research on it.
I've learned a lot from talking to you today, Andrew. Thank you very much. You've given some really good advice.
Sarah, it's been a pleasure. Even researching on you before this podcast, I've got a couple notes here, guys. It's an eye-opening experience. Talking to somebody who has similarities but also difference is something that I appreciate and I value. And I'm sure I'm not the only one listening to this and talking to you that has gained some experience from you today. Thank you so much.